All three.
All right.
All right. How you guys doing?
Fantastic. Gentlemen.
we have we have a very special guest today. We have with us Dr. Anthony Mazeroff from the Amazon Research Center for Ornamental Fishes. We've been talking a little bit of behind screen here, but we haven't really gotten into much into details and subjects because we wanted to share that with you guys. So without further ado, Dr. Anthony, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
A little bit about myself. Truthful to say, I'm an aquarium hobbyist. Been an aquarium hobbyist since I was about 9 years old, so that's about 53 years. I'm 62 now. I've kept and bred all sorts of fish throughout my life. And that's, being a hobbyist brought me into the world of science. Since I was a kid, I wanted to be a marine biologist. I had no idea what that meant. Yeah. It's like, a lot of kids go through that phase, and I just never grew out of that phase. So, fish have been always something I've been interested in.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I don't know if too many people are aware of, but you and I have a little bit of a commonality. We're both from the Imperial Valley. And for me, this is very special and exciting because it's not too often that you get to meet with people that are from the same area that you are. And, and it's relatively a very small community. It's an agricultural community where we come from. Believe it or not, we're growing vegetables out in the middle of the desert. So that's for the wonders of the technology. But yeah, to me, it's very special. I know, being from the valley, we have a lot of tendencies that only are very particular to us in the valley. One of them is being the proximity to the border. Growing up, it was probably the only place I can think of where, as far as demographics, Mexican or Spanish-speaking people are the majority in the community. Yep. And so it really creates an interesting dynamic for the people of the valley. So, that's just one of the things that I wanted to mention, because we don't get a lot of representation unless it's negative representation on media and out there in social outlets and stuff like that.
We have a lot of words that you would only use where we grew up. A lot of phrases that are very common to people at the border there in the Imperial Valley. That's just how it is.
Yeah. Well, and I realized that because growing up as a kid, there's a lot of English words that just kind of literally get pronounced in Spanish, and you assume you're speaking Spanish. Yep. One of them that particularly comes to mind is parking. ¿Dónde está el parking? As everybody asks, that's estacionamiento. I didn't know that the correct word was estacionamiento for many years until I actually got to travel into Mexico, and I mean further, just past the south of the border. And you're asking parking, and they're kind of looking at you like, what the hell are you asking? Sodas is the northern region of the country, kind of thing. As refrescos, if you go anywhere else that speak Spanish. So there's a lot of those little nuances that you don't realize. It's just stuff that you say on the border. But
I grew up. My mother was Mexican American, and I grew up hearing things that I thought were correct way of saying Spanish. Some of the words she would like to say, "Quítate tu pata." Well, it wasn't until I was an adult there were like,
take off your shoes.
Animal feet, not human feet, or quítate, which I thought meant excuse me. No, you say that to regular people, they say, what are you talking about? Get out of here, so.
Yeah, and it goes the same way with English, because one of the things that I noticed that people say a lot in the valley is burly instead of barely. And I used to say that all the time. And people would look at me when I started leaving the valley, and I would say, burly made it. And they're like, burly? They would kind of give me a odd look.
But burly means like a burly figure.
But everybody in the valley says burly. I burly made it. It's burly 6 o'clock. You don't realize it because everybody's using the word inappropriately. It's not until you get out of the valley and you start getting further away from the border where people just really speak English, and it's like, oh, you mean barely? It's like, yeah, that's what I said. No, that's not what you're saying. So, but yeah, it's very particular. There's a lot of nuances that happen in the valley that, you know, people from the valley can tell you're from there, but the people from the outside will also tell you that you're not from the region that you're in. But
I told you that though, George. I'm chuckling because I'm listening to you guys, you know, establish your rapport and go back and forth. And Doc, I was telling Jorge, since we've been establishing our relationship, I'm like, hey man, you're from the valley, bro. You're from the borderlands. All you people from the border, you guys are different. And when I say the borderlands, I'm talking about that swath of land from El Paso all the way to Tijuana, that whole little 250 miles north or south, east to west, from there to there. It's a whole different breed of person. And I've been fortunate enough to travel, be in the military, be around a lot of people. I can tell when somebody's from the border. Y'all a different breed of animal entirely. And that's why I was sitting up here chuckling, because it's the truth, especially with the colloquialisms, the words. There's a lot of words that I was laughing because I'm like, well, that's normal. I didn't know that wasn't normal until I left this microcosm, this little environment here, this bubble, and went and got exposed to people.
So now getting back to Dr. Anthony. So you growing up in the Imperial Valley, did you go to school in the valley? Did you
Yeah, I went to, I grew up in Imperial, which is about 20 miles north of where George grew up in Calexico. I went to Imperial High, went to Imperial Valley College, the junior college, the community college we had in the valley, and then from there I went to UC Santa Barbara. I lived up until I was 23 years old in California. And then when I went to graduate school, I didn't really live in California until my wife and I moved back in 2000. So from 1985 to 2000, I lived in Arizona. I went to school in Arizona, Louisiana, then worked in New Mexico, and then Texas before we came back to California.
Now, let me ask you, this phenomenon is also very particular with you, but growing up in the valley, I remember growing up, we didn't travel very much.
Yeah.
Our whole microcosm was just in the Imperial Valley. It wasn't until I joined the military that I really got to see what the world was like. What was it like for you, your first experience leaving the valley, the culture of the valley, and then going to Santa Barbara, where it's totally drastic because we're from a desert environment, you're going to a coastal area, people are totally different. What was that like, that adjustment?
It was a hard adjustment because I almost flunked out of school because I was a scuba diver. I liked the ocean, so the campus at UC Santa Barbara is right on the beach, and so I spent too much time on the beach, not enough time in the classroom. So it was a hard transition before. Our family would go to San Diego once in a great while, maybe once every 3 or 4 months or something. So for us, driving that 2.5 hours to San Diego was like going to the big city. Like it was almost like Las Vegas, get into the nice, cool weather, especially during the summer times when it's 115 degrees outside. You would go to San Diego and it's 80 degrees and you think, oh, this is the best place to live in the world. So it was a different transition, difficult transition in reality when I went to Santa Barbara.
Oh, okay. And then, so you go to school, you go to Santa Barbara. Obviously, you said you did your postgraduate education outside of Santa Barbara.
Yeah.
How do we go from you finishing school and you realizing that you wanted to go to South America?
Well, before that, I was doing all my research in the Middle East, in Israel, in Jordan, working on the coral reefs there. And when I came back to California, you know, the Middle East, we're still having some issues with the Middle East conflict. And so I thought it'd just be better to stay closer to home, so to speak. And, you know, as someone who's always had freshwater aquariums, I've had saltwater in my life, but I've mostly specialized in freshwater. My favorite fish in the world is the discus. So I wanted to go to South America. I wanted to go to the Amazon to study discus. And I first actually started working in Colombia, but the research lab I was affiliated with, they were rather xenophobic. The director, you know, really didn't like foreign scientists working with them, and I couldn't find discus. So then that's when I decided to go to Peru, because I know Iquitos has discus there, even though they're not native discus. The ones that are found very close to Iquitos, I knew they were there. So I emailed a bunch of exporters to see if they could help me with arranging fishermen to help me collect fish. And so, you know, they were very open to that, more so than they were in Colombia. So that's how I started it in Peru, just as a research project. And one of the people that helped me was Stingray Aquarium, which is the largest exporter of fish out of Peru. And their manager there became very good friends. He doesn't speak English. You know, my Spanish was, you know, at the time was very, even though I grew up hearing Spanish, I never wanted to learn Spanish. It was the stupidest thing I could have ever done in my life. And so we learned to communicate with each other very elementary. And we still, you know, we still have a hard time communicating with each other, because my Spanish is, you know, it's okay, but it's still not, I'm not, you know, it's not like it's my second good language. It's a struggle still. And so he came to me and said, hey, there's an opportunity to buy some land. You ever think about having a research center? And at the time, I, you know, never even thought about having a research center. And so I talked to my wife. The land was very cheap for as land goes. And so we bought it about 10, 12 years ago. The land, and it kind of sat idle for a while. Then there's laws in Peru, homestead laws, in that if you find land and you build a home on it and show use of it, that land can become your land. And so that's what happened to us. We lost about a third of our land because some guy overnight built a house on it. And we went to the village that we bought the land from, and we said, you know, what can we do? He said, well, you really can't do anything, because at the time we didn't have clear title to the land. Primarily because the village that we bought the land from didn't have clear title. They were still working through their title system. And so, you know, at that point we decided we have to do something to this land or we're going to lose it all. And at that point is when we really started building the research center on that land. And so that was probably about 7 years ago when that really happened.
All right. Well, let me do something real quick, because I know it's easy to talk about geographical areas, but sometimes it's hard for us to visualize what we're talking about. So let me pull this up real quick, and so that those of you that are here with us can kind of get an understanding of first of all, where we're from and why it's so amazing that Dr. Anthony ended up in Peru, because it's a far distance from where you originally grew up. I know we were talking about, let me go to that. Here we go. This is obviously a map of the United States, but the region that we are from is right in here in this corner between California, Arizona, and Mexico. As you guys can see here, this is Mexico. Let me bring this over. This is Mexicali. This area right in here is what is known as the Imperial Valley. This is all desert area. Let me see if I can change the, nope, wrong one. So, let me go back. Okay, I gotta make this smaller.
Hey, wait a minute, George.
Yeah.
Turn down the music.
Okay. Let me do
People have
that
been
first.
commenting about that.
It's too loud.
Well, they you know.
They're trying to hear us, and they. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me go in here. All right. Hopefully that's better.
Yeah, that's a lot better. I didn't want to interrupt and say nothing. Thank you, Doc.
Well, you know, I'm known for being rude, so that's okay.
No, it's not rude at all. It's just decorum. Thank you. That's why I said thank you.
All right. This is the Imperial Valley. So, oh wait, how come I can't get over? There we go. Oh, really? It doesn't like us because we're so small of a community.
Doesn't believe we exist.
I know. We're a little. Oh, really? I need a mouse. Well, anyways, let's see. Well, you guys can get an idea of where we're from. It's not that important, but in relation to where we're going from there all the way down to Peru. Why is it doing this today? Let's go. It was working fine a while ago. All right, let me go back. Let me put it. Nope, that's not what I want. Talk about. Now I ain't cooperating. There we go. Now, why is my screen so big? All right, this is the research center. This is down in Peru. For those of you that weren't aware, Peru is in South America. And in relation to the United States, it's actually quite a bit of a distance. So here we have the States. This is Peru down here. And your research facility is inland in Peru. Is that pretty much the tail end of the Amazon River where you guys are located? Or is it the beginning?
Well, it's close to the headwaters. I mean, you know, it's probably 600 miles away from us. Probably about 200.
Ooh.
But yeah, we're at the very start of the Amazon.
Okay, so I have some questions about that. The whole with Peru, in regards to Peru. So I'm listening, and this whole thing is just like it's amazing. So my question, when you were in college,
Yep.
what was the benchmark point? What happened in your life that caused you to make that change to say, hey, this is going to be my lifestyle. I'm going to do something that has to do with fish, not necessarily the aquarium hobby,
Yeah.
but, you know, I'm working with fish. And then you pull the trigger. Now you're doing great things.
You know, it's hard.
Was it serendipity? Let me add that as well.
In some ways, you know, my father was elementary and junior high school teacher, so education was really important to him and my mother. You know, my mother just went to high school, but she always encouraged us to go to college. Wasn't, you know, it wasn't expected per se, but it was just something that I thought was expected of me.
Okay.
You know, in my own mind. And really just, I stayed in school for one reason, and that is I could never find a job. You know, and they paid me to go to school.
Yeah. Hey.
You know, I received assistantships, research and teaching assistantships. So my postgraduate career, you know, my master's and my PhDs were basically free. And how could you turn down money like that?
No.
And so, you know, I was very fortunate. I will say that, you know, as a student, I wasn't one of the best students. I think I have been very lucky in my life that I've been at the right place at the right time. You know, those opportunities just presented itself to me because I happened to be in the right place.
Gotcha.
You
So with Peru, because I'm listening to you and George talk about parallels in life, being from the Imperial Valley area,
Mhm.
and it's amazing. Me and you have a lot of parallels. I'm going to share with you. The whole being an expatriate is something that I never gave it much thought, but it's something that I can see. It's my life now, and a lot of it was subliminally because of the hobby.
Mhm.
Um, the land, the rules, it's the same thing in the Dominican Republic. You don't use land, somebody can, you know, usurp that land from you.
Yep.
They can take it.
Yep.
It's a cultural thing, and the movement, the working with the local population. Basically, if you could describe that whole process of taking something like you loving discus, turning it into a research facility, and doing work in the hobby, tangible work. Basically, turning your passion into something serving that serves
Yep.
a purpose, not
Yep.
just hey, look at me, look what I got in my house.
Yeah, I both my wife and I have been very fortunate in life, and I've always felt a need or a calling to help others. And in Peru, we're trying to help the local fishermen. We're helping the local village that we're in. Um, by all the people we hire are from that village.
Mm-hmm.
We support the village with helping with their celebrations. In the past we done Mother's Day celebrations for them. The village is called 31 de Mayo, 31st of May, and so on 31st of May they have a big celebration, and we provide money for them to have the big celebration. Every Christmas, we have a big Christmas party for the kids, and we give them gifts because this is a small village. As our standards would go, it's a very poor village. But most people there's no running water in the village. They tried to bring running water to the village, and then for some reason the government ran out of money, and we all know what that means in many places. There's no indoor plumbing at all, and because of that, there's an obligation, I think, for us to give back. That's for me and my wife, because we've been very fortunate. So it's just something. Fortunately, that's something both her and I believe in.
Wow.
She's an aquarium person too. I mean, she's always been around aquarium. So we actually met serendipitously because she was a research volunteer for me when I was working on clownfish in the Red Sea.
Okay.
It was a scuba diving project. And so we met 26 years ago. Actually.
Wow.
We've been married 25 years this past August.
And this was when you were in Israel?
This was when I was in Israel.
In Haifa?
Yeah. No, in Eilat, which is right on the Red Sea coast.
Okay. See, I was in Haifa.
Yeah.
We didn't stop in Eilat. But I've been to Israel several times.
Yeah.
It's
so,
beautiful.
just when you've been fortunate, there's two ways you can go. One is to be very only think about yourself.
Right.
But I wasn't brought up that way.
Okay.
My parents, we didn't have a lot of money growing up, but if someone was hungry, they would bring him into the house and feed him. Everybody was welcome in our house no matter what. So being raised that way, I still feel that same way as my parents did.
Okay. Now, I want to get into the fish.
Let's get into the
And
fish.
playing in the mud
Yep.
and just being in the jungle.
Yep.
I like getting stamps on my passport. I can't wait until I figure out how to go over there. Iquitos is like the holy grail. Let's talk about that first. That's the best way to just get into this thing.
Okay.
Iquitos, please explain for the people, right? Iquitos is the holy grail of hobbyists along the lines of this is where like the collecting it's a journey.
Yep.
If you do it better, please. I'm not gonna give it justice.
All the fish that come out of Peru go to Iquitos. The gold laser catfish, green laser catfish, which is from southern Peru, the Madres de Dios area. It all gets shipped to Iquitos first, because that's where all the big exporters are. And then from Iquitos, you go to Lima, and then from Lima, they're shipped out all over the world. But yeah, it's Iquitos as a city is about 700,000 people, so it's a very large city. And it's one of the few cities where the only way you can get to it is either fly into it or take a boat. So it's an island unto itself. It's surrounded by the Amazon River, the Itaya River, and the Rio Nanay. So it's really surrounded by rivers all throughout. So you have to zoom out and you can actually see the three rivers that surround it. Keep on going, keep on going. Yeah. So to the right there, that's the Amazon.
Okay.
And to the left is a small river, the Rio Nanay.
Okay.
Right there. And then the Itaya is between the city and the Amazon River.
Okay. That's it right there.
There is one road that goes out, and that goes south to a city called Nauta, which is about 40 miles away, which people say, oh, if they drive to Nauta, that's an all-day journey.
I already know what you mean.
Yeah.
It's so true.
It's forever down there, and so it's really an isolated area. It's often forgotten by the government.
Mm-hmm.
It's left by itself a lot of times. But yeah, it's there's a lot of villages in the area to the right of Iquitos that are out in the middle of nowhere. Mm-hmm. That a lot of the fish come out of as well. And we're actually working with some of the fishermen in some of these faraway villages to actually help them get better money for their fish. They feel like they're being ripped off by the middleman, and they always are.
Okay.
And the fishermen, let's say, the Cory Weissmani, which used to be about $25 each, wholesale price or exporter price. The exporter would buy them off the middleman for, let's say, $10 each.
Mm-hmm.
But the middleman would buy them off the fisherman for like 10 cents. So it's the fishermen that are really suffering in this whole supply chain here. And so we're working with a couple fishermen communities, Fishers Association, to try to increase their prices for their fish, but not increasing the export price. And so, we're trying to help the people there in those villages do that. We're trying to teach sustainable aquaculture to these fishermen, so they have a steady income all year round, as opposed to just the income during the fishing season, which is just the dry season.
Right.
They can't fish for aquarium fishes during high water season because all the fish go into the flooded forest to breed, and you can't get to those fish very, very easily.
Okay. So, Doc, you're touching on some jewels. Okay.
No, I'm not. No.
Yeah. Hey, pause. Hey, whoa, this ain't that kind of show now.
Sorry.
All right now.
I just embarrassed myself.
No, okay. I would say you hitting those some real solid points that I'm always iterating. One of which being the ebb and flow of the seasons and the fact that the majority of the fish that are aquarium suitable, that are hobby suitable, the only reason that they are hobby suitable is because nature and their lifestyle, thusly in nature, is easy enough to replicate to scale by the average hobbyist.
Yep.
Otherwise, they would have no place.
Yep.
That also is what I lead to say is when you get the fish police, as we affectionately like to refer to them here, spouting rhetoric, but they have no basis for this rhetoric because they've never been outside before. So me being a veteran, I like to use the colloquialism, the term, a lot of this stuff that we keep in aquariums is tougher than woodpecker lips because it has to be.
Yeah.
And when I see, 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old little girl getting eviscerated on a message board or something, or a chat room or whatever like that, by people who, like a privileged hipster, they never been outside. They don't, they think tofu's real meat. It bothers me. So this is one of those opportunities where you're in the field, you're formally educated, plus you have a plethora of life experience, and you have the ability to articulate it, to crystallize these experiences into words that the average, the rule, not the exception, the average individual can grasp onto a little better. So could you talk about Igapos and the Pantanal or any of those microbiomes that the majority of our South American fish come from? Because that's what's been my fascination. And that's really what I've been gearing myself toward on my personal journey in the hobby. And that's kind of what helps me reinforce my formal education and my personal experiences as well. So, the flooding, the nitrates, the nitrites, the breeding cycle, all of that, all those different things in your personal experience.
I have a question to ask you both, and I want you to describe what you think it is. When you design a Amazonian biotope in one of your aquariums, tell me what goes into it.
Oh, wow.
Well, what part of the Amazon?
That's what I was going to say.
Let's just say you're going to do an Amazon biotope.
Okay. More than likely, it's going to be tannin water.
Okay.
Depending on where you're at, it's going to depend on how dark it is. But
sure.
Because you're dealing with tannin, you're really just going to find rocks, algae, sticks, branches, fallen leaves, a lot of leaf debris at the bottom. And that's pretty much it. I mean, you might have plants, but that's up at the upper banks.
Wait. What are you talking about?
Man, Doc, I feel like you set us up on this one. I'm not even going to lie to you.
That's the way I would do it. I mean, I could be wrong.
I'm going to be a country boy.
Okay.
I'm going to run it down to you like a country boy. The Amazon is a river, and rivers move. It's just like a street, okay? I'm from Houston. I'm going to take a common street, one of the most well-known streets in Houston, Westheimer, okay? Depending on what part of Westheimer you own in the city of Houston, it's going to be dictated by the demographics and the area based on the ebb and flow of society, without getting too political. You know what I'm saying? Certain people move at certain times, do certain things, and other people end up stuck there. There you go. So when I say I'm gonna lay down an Amazon tank, and I vaguely stay general. Me, I'm thinking the river, I'm thinking elements of the river. And then me having, I don't want to call it OCD, but not being good at making choices when I have too many options, I kind of try to target in on a niche, a specific biome. So what I'll say is, like, I'm gonna use this tank behind me as an example. It's not a biotope, it's an ecotope, meaning I put elements of certain things that I know exist, stuff that I've seen, stuff that I have passport stamps to verify, I'm grounded, toes in dirt, you know, and that's the best I can do. So it would be water, it would be wood.
That's a good start. Water's good.
It would be water, it would be wood. I don't put rocks. But then I would say, where you at in some of the upper tributaries, it's river stone. It's liquid rock. The water's, the pH is high. It's a silty bottom. It's different, you know. And 200 miles down the river, man, it's the slums. You got an Igapo, you know, an 8-foot deep hole that's still part of the Amazon, loaded with capybara feces and a bunch of hoplo catfish, X, Y, and Z. It is stagnant, nasty, but some of the most beautiful fish come out of that water, and they have to have those decrepit conditions in order to replicate their life cycle. So that's why I feel like a setup. I would just say rocks, wood, water, leaves, maybe not rocks, and some fish.
Yeah, you know, it really depends upon where you're at. But when most people, you know, set up a Amazonian tank, the first thing they want to put in there is Amazon sword plants.
Yeah. Nope.
You know,
that's so misunderstood plant.
Yeah, you know, most of the plants that we associate with as Amazonian plants, especially the submerged plants, are not found in the rivers, are not found in the creeks. They're found in the Pantanal. They're found in the area that only floods at the very highest water out in the plains of Brazil.
Right.
Many of these plants, just as long as they're in mud, you know, Amazon swords, they can grow 3, 4, 5 feet high.
That's right.
When they're not submerged. And, you know, we think that, they have to be submerged, but just as long as they stay moist. Yeah. And so, you know, for the most part, an Amazonian biotope is really what George described. It's, you know, dark stained water for the most part, except the Amazon River itself is a white river. It has lots of clay, high pH, high conductivity. And so the fish there tend to be much different than the blackwater fish. And it's really the blackwater fish that we associated as Amazonian waters.
Right.
But if you want to say what the biotope of an Amazon river is, you know, it's a whitewater river, hard river, high pH.
I might mess around and have a stroke on camera. Man, will you explain to the people, right? Because what happens is, between my Southeast Texas vernacular and my Navy colloquialisms mixed with my unbridled passion for everything that I do, and sometimes what I'm trying to convey, what I'm trying to articulate, it get kind of mixed up and me trying to get to the point. Can you explain to the people, black water, white water? I have been trying to get somebody that understand how when water goes through fields, it goes through the riparian area, it goes through mud, it goes through leaf litter, it picks up all these tannins and nutrients, and it makes black water. The difference between turbidity in a white river and silty water, where it's just suspended sediment in the river, versus clear stained black water that has been filtered through a sandy loam, through an acidic tannic peat, that because of the phenols and the different chemicals released in the tannins and that amalgam, that soup of leaf litter, you know, how it affects the ionic exchange in the water regarding to the uptake of nutrients. And that's why in black water you hardly see a lot of submerged plant growth. You only see them really in the riparian areas, in the areas where there's mud collected, so little islands, etc. And the plants that you do see in black water growing in a submerged state, it's because of that seasonal ebb and flow of the monsoon. They're growing there flooded. So that goes to sustainability, which really comes to understanding what it is you're trying to undertake.
Yep.
So dive into that, if you will, for us.
Best way I can explain black water is if you see a glass of tea or a cup of tea, it's brown in color, but it's crystal clear. You don't see any things floating in the water per se.
Right.
And that's a typical black water stream or black water river.
What did you do?
Soils, it's picking up tannic acids, humic acids. The tannins is what makes it brown.
Yes.
As it's flowing through all that leaf litter, it's picking up those tannins, which making it brown. A low pH because both the tannic acids and the humic acid acts on the water to reduce the pH. There are some nutrients, but because the pH is so low, things tend not to biodegrade very quickly. In other words, those nutrients aren't as readily available as they would be at higher pH. Also, something that a lot of people forget or aren't aware of, and I talk about in some of my talks, is that below pH of 7, ammonia becomes less toxic. It's converted into ammonium, and that is not a toxic form. And the organisms that we think are involved or are involved in the most part, the nitrogen bacteria, Nitrosomonas, Nitrobacter, they die under low pHs. So those bacteria that we think are involved in the nitrogen cycle aren't there under low pHs.
Right.
And so all that nitrogenous waste is bound up in ammonium, which is not available to the plants. So that's why you don't see a lot of plants in these black water areas. The light doesn't penetrate very deep in these waters, and so what you find here is a lot of floating plants.
Right.
You find, water lettuce. You find water hyacinths.
Right.
And so those are going to have extensive root systems that if you've ever had water Sprite in your tank that's floating on the surface, you've had it in there for 6-7 months, when you take it out, it's going to be filled with sediments.
Right.
And so they're capturing all the little sediment that's going into the water, and they're using that sediment as a nutrient base. They're able to have some bacteria live in there and break down that material to them.
Right.
And so
you said something good now.
That's a typical black water stream there. Black water area where I collect. We primarily collect in the black water areas, and that's typically how it is.
See, you touched on the soil. This is the first time we've really been able to dive into plants. And I did a simulation. I did a Pantanal simulation tank, and I ran it for about 3 years. I ran an anaerobic substrate. I ran the whole simulation. It's on my YouTube channel. Every concept that you just described, I was trying to actualize and simulate in a controlled aquarium environment. And one of the things that you were talking about is ammonia. And so if you can dig into this just a little more, talking about plants and nutrient uptake and the toxicity of ammonia, where you have ionized ammonia versus unionized ammonia. So what is that? NH3, NH4, and how the untoxic one versus the toxic one, and how it breaks down and how it makes the hemoglobin toxic. And that's what really how it kills the fish. And then versus the other way, where it's not free available nitrate or nitrogen period, and your plants can't uptake it. So what would you do as an aquarist to mitigate that?
Yeah, we all know the nitrogen cycle. Ammonia gets converted to nitrite to begin with. Ammonia is highly toxic. Nitrite is less toxic, but it still is toxic. And then we have nitrate, which is the source that plants utilize for their growth processes. And nitrate is only toxic under really, really high conditions. I mean, we're talking million parts per million. So it's much less toxic. And so, no one likes to start their tank without any fish. The worst thing beginners do is and I do it too. You have a brand new tank, you dump in 40 fish into a tank. Well, your ammonia level is going to spike immediately and you'll start losing fish. Well, I have a photo and I've shown in, a video on my YouTube channel. You're not the only one with a YouTube channel there.
Hey, y'all go check out Dr. Anthony's YouTube channel.
But
put Dr. Anthony's YouTube channel in the chat, please, and thank you in advance.
We have our quarantine system at the research center for the fish that are going into the public aquarium, and I showed a 30-gallon tank. That's most of our tanks are 30-gallon type tanks with 1,000 neon tetras. You would never put 1,000 neon tetras in a 30-gallon tank at your house. But because the pH that they're swimming in is pH of about 5, that's what comes out of our reservoir, we don't worry about the nitrogen. We don't worry about the ammonia because it goes into the form of NH4, not NH3. And so it doesn't become toxic at all. So that 1 inch a gallon rule, you don't worry about it. You don't have to worry about it per se. There are other potential problems you can get, but you're not going to get the ammonia toxicity that you would in our tanks. My tank here in Southern California, the tank behind me with angelfish, our tap water is 8.6.
Okay.
400 or 500 microsiemens, which is the hardness is liquid rock coming out of our all the time. Our tap. Well, in a system like that, yes, you do have to worry about the ammonia getting too high.
Right.
And so you just add fish little by little. And so there really is, that chemistry makes a big difference on the conditions that you have to worry about for your fish in the home aquarium. Luckily for us there at the research center and for most of, the Amazon, you don't have to worry about the water coming from most of the rivers. Now, we do have well water on site.
That's what I was going to ask you. What about well water?
We have well water on our site that we use for, in our kitchen, in the bathrooms, in the laundry facilities. And that water coming from the well is liquid rock.
Oh, yeah.
It could, because it's coming from, 150 feet below the surface, and it's going through all that granite. So it's picking up all the calcium, all the magnesium coming from the rock. So yes, the well water is much different than the surface waters that you see.
Now, excuse me, because of the culture is different in Peru. Are you guys running that well water through like the salt or anything, any kind of pure salt or water softener or anything?
No, we're not. We run it through some carbon filtration, running through some just normal filters, let you use on water treatments. And one thing we do have to worry about, two things in our well water is hydrogen sulfide. That's very common in a lot of well waters, even here in the U.S. And iron. We have a lot of iron in our water. So we run a few iron filters and hydrogen sulfide filters that will reduce the smell and reduce the amount of iron, because when that iron hits the white showers, it stains it orange. And so that's really what we worry about more than anything, is the iron in that water.
Now, you just mentioned H2S, hydrogen sulfide.
Yeah.
And that's why I chuckled, because I was explaining, Watts, if you in the chat, if you listen and watch, listen up. I'm about to ask Doc. So I was explaining H2S when I was running the Pentanal tank. Every once in a while, because of these anaerobic gas pockets, I was running Corydoras hesperosus and Corydoras pygmaeus. Every once in a while, one of those little punks would hit one of those gas pockets and it would off. I would just ran at Prostella's gone. HY511's gone. It just gone. I'm like, but that's the science in it. To me, it was a beautiful experience because it sucked and my fish died, but look what we're doing now. And this is important. What I wanted to say is the experience versus talking about it. So in the world we live in now, everything is social media, it's technology, it's instant gratification. You really don't have a lot of people laying down the foundational work, getting the foundational knowledge before they go into an undertaking, specifically the aquarium hobby. So right here, what we're doing, just by talking to you and you being able to dig into your tool bag of personal experiences and knowledges and be able to just simply dispel the, I don't call it a myth, but dispel the misconceptions. That's important. The 1 inch per gallon rule, the pH. So basically talking about science, meaning stuff that is set in stone, and taking those elements that are set in stone, those principles, and then pairing them together with personal experience. And if you could, tie that into something for the youth, right? And for the beginner hobbyist to say, hey, foundational knowledge is always the best way to go. You can't beat it.
I get in the tank behind me, I get H2S pockets as well. It's primarily when I just put in food that doesn't disperse. It goes straight to the bottom, and you have this big pile of food at the bottom, and the fish can't eat it fast enough. It sits there for a couple of days, starts to decompose, and goes into the sediments, and the bacteria then in the sediments start to break it down. The anaerobic bacteria break it down into hydrogen sulfide. So they off-gas it as part of the metabolitic process. In natural systems, you worry less about that, because there's an old phrase in environmental biology it says the solution to pollution is dilution. And because there's so much water being flowed through that system, some of these things we worry about as hobbyists, in natural systems, you don't necessarily worry about them as much, because the amount of water that's going through just dissipates any of that stuff. And so, occasionally when we're walking in some of these streams, especially when the water gets lower, you do hit some hydrogen sulfide pockets, but you don't see the fish all of a sudden come to the surface, because that water is still flowing. So it's actually being pushed away from the fish. So, some of the things we do see in the aquarium hobbyists are artifacts of the tiny amount of water that we have for our fish. Even if you have a 250 gallon tank and you're filled with tetras, potentially you're going to deal with problems, because that's a 250 gallon stagnant system per se. You're not putting 500 gallons an hour through that tank. and flushing it continually like you see in the systems, in natural systems, natural riverine and stream systems.
Right. Now, this is a good point you bring it up. It's 250-gallon tank. You're still going to have problems because it's a 250-gallon tank. Explain, if you can, how understanding the basic principles of nature, the basic principles of aquarium husbandry, of physics, surface tension, volume, etc., how you can take those things and use them and manipulate them to get what kind of aquatic ecosystem you want to create. And I'm going to lead you with an example. The riverine ecosystem may not be a swamp or a tannic backwater stream in Malaysia or South America. However, it's an ecosystem that works. And if you could explain how understanding that helps you figure out how and why. I'm not going to keep scarlet baddies in the same ecotope, if you will, that I would keep a Farowella.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's just, a good example is if we look at Brazil with the Zingzu River.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's being dammed. People say, a fish is a fish. What's the big thing about damming the river? There's still water there for the fish, but the problem is that fish have evolved over millions of years to meet certain conditions in their environment. A fish that is adapted to a river is much different body style than a fish that is adapted for non-moving waters, a pond or a lake. And that's what you create behind that dam is this big lake. The plecos that come from the Zinzu, many of the other fish are adapted to really fast running water. With fast running water, you get more oxygen. With still water, you tend to get less oxygen. So those fish that have adapted to the Zinzu or any river system, when you dam it, they become maladapted. They don't belong in that system anymore. And so we can see that in our tanks. How many of us in our tanks with our plecos and some of the tetras run a pump in a 40-gallon tank that is 800 gallons an hour? You would just never see that. But some of the fish,
they need it. Like
hill stream loaches.
Yes.
Hill stream loaches need really fast water. Their body is built for them to suck onto rocks in that really fast moving water. And that's what they prefer. And that's when you get breeding of those fish. The only time you really get breeding of hill stream loaches is when you give them really, really fast, clean water. So by looking at what's happening in nature, it gives us a better idea of how we should do our hobby.
Thank you.
You can't put, even if you have a native system, you don't want to put a bluegill, a high-bodied fish that's been adapted to a lake system.
Thank you.
With some of these darters that need fast water. Sure, they'll live in slow water. They'll live in an aquarium, but they will do a lot better if they have some current. Whereas a big old flat fish like a big bluegill is not going to do that well in a fast-moving riverine system.
Let me ask something real quick.
Go ahead.
Going back to the example of the hill stream loaches.
Yeah.
The reason I say this, can fish eventually adapt to the change of environment? Because the reason I ask this is because I've seen other hobbyists put videos where they say they've been able to get these fish to breed in non-moving water. Mm-hmm. Now, is that because these fish are no longer from the wild, they're second, third generation, and they kind of adapted to that situation? Or is it you can bring a wild fish and it'll adapt to the environment it gets put in?
It's a combination of both. Most of the fish that we see in the hobby are bred in ponds, especially in Southeast Asia. or even Florida. And so they start to take on characteristics that allow them to do better in a pond system. But just, just because a fish breeds doesn't necessarily mean it's in the best condition.
Right.
Look at the orcas that they used to have at marine parks.
Mm-hmm.
They would breed in these small tanks, but you would never say that killer whale in that small
concrete pond
is in a good condition.
Right.
It's in its prime habitat. So, there's always fish that will breed, but if they breed under those conditions, what do you think? If you give them the correct conditions,
oh man,
how much more they would breed or how sooner they would breed for you. I want to get to one question that someone asked in chat, and that was about
ppms,
about nitrate and nitrite. So nitrite, which is the first thing that's broken off from the ammonia, about 1 part per million to 5 is, above 5 you'll have problems with nitrite, and with nitrate, which is the end product, anything above about 60, 70 parts per million or milligrams per liter, whatever you want to call it, they're roughly equivalent. That's when it starts to become toxic. But it's really easy to get rid of nitrate. Either have plants or do a water change. A water change is really the same action as a flowing river. Your solution to solution is dilution. By doing your water changes, you get that dilution effect. Of course, you're reducing. If you do a 50% water change, you're reducing all those bad chemicals and also all the good stuff by 50%. So you have to remember that is, if you're trying to grow plants and you're dosing your plants with your fertilizers, when you do a 50% water change, you've reduced all your nutrients by 50% as well.
See, you just brought up a fantastic, everything's going together. You're talking about the bluegill and the body type and understanding nature. Hey, if we looked at nature, you could imagine what this would do for your fish at home and where this would bring the hobby. Mm-hmm. Well, I want to ask you about a specific fish, Microgeophagus, the German blue rams, and the misconception about the water quality, the breeding. That's a good example of fish. With that same question, going back to you saying the dam, what George said about the adaptation. Touch on us as hobbyists and our responsibility as stewards of the earth and conservation. Now they are going to dam that Xingu River. How many species are going to be lost because of that? What can we do to keep it?
Unfortunately, as a person of the world, as a citizen of this earth, let's say outside of a hobby, we really can't do much because that's, internal politics of Brazil. That's one thing I truly believe in is, as an American, it's not my place to go into a country and tell them what they should do.
Right.
Look at what America did to the American continent. How much of the original forest land we cut down. How many dams did we build? How many rivers have we channelized to make sure they don't flood anymore, which is a natural process for rivers to go through. But what I'd like to do is show them alternatives to what they're doing, or, how to overcome some of these problems that they may create by putting in a dam. But as hobbyists, unfortunately, up until recently, all the fish in the Xingu River were illegal to export out of Brazil. Now they've reduced that, so some of these fish are being exported legally out of Brazil. And as hobbyists, and I believe this with any fish, the care species, the gadiids that we see in the hobby, I think we have a responsibility to keep those species alive.
Yes.
Try to breed them in the hobby and this may seem strange coming from someone who says we should teach the fishermen how to sustainably breed their fish. I think we should rely more on these captive bred fish and less on wild caught fish, especially some of these rarer species. Because if we go and demand these rare species be captured from the environment, we're only reducing the overall populations that are found in natural environments. You know, a typical example is the Celestial Pearl Daniel. Gorgeous little fish. When I first saw it, I didn't know how tiny it was, but you know, we all say, "Ooh, look at that! It looks like a trout." You know, come to find out, they're 1 inch long fish, which makes them even more gorgeous. Within 2 years after that fish was discovered, it was pretty well wiped out in the environment because they were only found in 2 or 3 or 4 swampy areas. And people went in and collected them, but yet probably 1 billion a year are being produced in Southeast Asia right now on farms. So you know, we should strive to try to breed these in captivity, not necessarily under these, you know, these agro type conditions like they breed fish in, you know, Florida and in Southeast Asia, but as hobbyists. Breed the fish, breed quality fish to keep quality fish in the hobby.
Now, let me throw something in here to kind of not confuse people, because I'm tracking what you say, to kind of not confuse people. So with the farmers being sustainable, right? So I'm going to buy a wild caught neon tetra, because them collecting neon tetras is not putting a dent to my knowledge and my passport stamps. They ain't hurting them. They ain't going nowhere. Whereas something like the CPD or one of the Xingu River Plecos, I think, it would be a good idea to start breeding those in captivity. Like the Aphinius minto is a fish we're running right now, and it's a good one. What you got, George? But something along those lines.
What I was, and I don't know if this is what Dr. Anthony is trying to say, but this is the way I'm understanding it. It's not necessarily that you're no longer getting fish from the wild, but it's allowing those communities to be able to farm those fish from what was in the wild and be able to reproduce them in captivity, to be able to have a stock to supply for the markets.
Right.
And isn't that kind of what your facility is doing currently, is trying to teach the local economy that they can take a couple of those fish from the wild and start reproducing them, and they're still coming from these regions, but you're not going into the river necessarily to deplete the sources there.
Well, what happens there in many communities that fish for aquarium fishes that have a dry season and a flood season is that the only time you can catch fish for the hobby is during the dry season. And so what they do is they catch as many as they can because they'll get more money from it. So the more you catch, the more money you get. But there is this supply and demand. As you catch more and more, the price goes down. So you have to catch more to get the same amount of money as you did before by bringing in very few fish. And so what we're trying to tell them and try to teach them is that we're not saying stop fishing. I mean, that's their livelihood.
Right.
But during the winter time or during the rainy season, when they can't go out and fish, if they have ponds that they've set up, you have a steady fish supply. You can go in and harvest those juveniles from your ponds and sell them during that time when you're not fishing. So they don't have to go out and do other destructive mechanisms, cutting down the trees and get firewood for their house, or, going into other destructive employments. Neon tetra is a prime example. In ecology, there's a R and K species, and they're considered R species because they're very short-lived. Mm-hmm. They have a high reproductive event per reproductive cycle, and so it's said that you can't overfish fish like that.
Right.
But we're talking about cichlids that don't have 1,000 babies, maybe have 100 babies it's easy to over collect a fish like that. And those are prime examples where you could bring him into pond situations. You know, we've demonstrated at the research facility with the pistogrammas. We throw pistogrammas in our ponds. You don't have to feed them. There's all these aquatic insects, all these things that go into the water naturally, and they'll breed perfectly fine. And so it's not like you're intensively feeding the fish. You're going to have to spend lots of money on food. We don't even feed ours.
See, that brings up a great point we've been on, is the internal food web. So the biointegrity in your fish tank and any ecosystem, but aquatic ecosystems. And George just did a video. He had a vacation. He left his tank for several days. And me and him talking, he was like, man, you think the fish gonna be okay? I was like, bro, they're gonna be fine. I was like, bro, I'm in the Navy and I travel all the time. The fish will be fine. And he's like, I kind of know, and then we talked about it. So if you could dive into that, and then aquaculture on a larger scale, that right there, what you're talking about is sustainable aquaculture in some respects.
No, it is. You know, it's sustainable in that you're not. You know, I teach a course right now at the university called Sustainable Aquaculture.
Okay.
And we primarily talk about food fish.
Good. Okay.
And food fish aquaculture, as we do it now, is unsustainable. Let's say catfish. For every 2 or 3 pounds of food that you give that fish, you're only going to get probably a pound of meat. So you're wasting 2 times up to 3 times that amount in food, in protein. And where does that protein come from? Comes from other fish normally. They're doing more soybean based, but you know, it's still not 100% soybean. So in that case, it's unsustainable. But in the case of aquaculture for aquarium purposes, in the native environments, it is sustainable for the food purposes. You're not feeding these fish. You're not building huge ponds. We're talking about, you know, a 6 foot by 6 foot and 3 feet deep pond. So they're not massive aquaculture ponds like you see in Florida or even Southeast Asia. These are very small systems that can supplement their income. And, you know, with when we have an aquarium at home, look at George's aquarium behind him, crystal clear. If you see any little insect in there, what do you do, George?
I leave them.
I don't. Okay.
I
know what you're getting at. Yeah. I leave mine too. I don't feed my fish.
And that's why you can go leave for a week and come back and your fish won't be dead. I had a blind fish that would not eat because it couldn't detect the food. It lived in the tank because I did, you know, maybe I should have euthanized it, but it lived in the tank for 3 months before it finally died. So, you know, fish have a slower metabolism. They don't have to eat every day. In the wild, they don't eat every day. You know, it's a boom or bust. They either find a food source, they eat a lot of it until it's gone, and then you know, maybe 2 or 3 days are picking at little things. But they don't, you know, in aquaculture, in our aquarium, fish are trained when they see you to come to the front of the tank because they know they're going to be fed. You know, fish aren't stupid creatures. Fish have a memory. We all think, 5-second memory in a goldfish. No, there's, you know, a couple, 3-4 weeks a month memory there. And so we train the fish every time they see us to come to the surface, come to the front of the glass, and we'll feed them. You know, that doesn't happen in the wild.
Yeah.
You know, it's a valid point.
Yeah, you know, in aquaculture, you're throwing out the fish food, the pellets at a certain time of the day, every day, 2 or 3 times a day. Those fish are going to learn. They're going to remember those times, and they're going to be ready for that food. When you leave a fish alone for, you know, a week without feeding it, first 3 or 4 days is probably, where are you at? How can you not feed me? But then it starts to turn into a normal predator, start cruising the tank,
Origin.
all the little microorganisms, all the little, the scuds or some sea shrimp that we don't even know that are in our tank, and they'll start feeding off that. Discus in the wild, they don't eat beef heart. They eat small shrimp. And a lot of times they'll eat periphyton, which is the film that covers the wood and and the rocks and things. So they're picking at that all day long. Well, when we leave, they begin to do that again. And so the worst thing I say is to have someone who doesn't know anything about your fish to feed your fish if they're going to be gone for a week. Is what happens. They overfeed. Yeah, they overfeed. It's always better to underfeed than to overfeed for sure. But they're so worried about killing your fish.
Right.
So worried about killing your fish that they go overboard with it.
Well, you were talking about the periphyton that's my secret weapon, but the fish in the wild, they don't eat every day, and they have times of boom or bust, feast or famine. In the hobby, if you can explain this phenomenon, that it's not neglect, and basically there's no hard fast rule in the hobby. There's a difference between animal welfare and husbandry and science. And then as a hobbyist, you take the two. You take animal welfare and husbandry right here. Then you take a science and a passion for something creative. You merge them. Then you have a hobby. What I see is with the fish police and all these people that are just, the Lord and Savior when it comes to this is the way and the only way. What I see is a lot of rhetoric. And it comes from a lack of understanding. But what happens is when people put the emotions into it, the message, it dissipates. So what I'm trying to figure out a way to do is use the hobby as a vehicle to say, hey, substance is good. It's good to read books. It's good to open your mind and try to look at other perspectives and understand, hey, this is a living animal. It's got to be wild somewhere. There's nobody running around dropping fish flakes and pellets and stuff, sticking Sarah O nips on the side of the wood in the creek. So what's going on? And I think we miss out on a blessing that the hobby gives us, which is the ability to observe and understand the nature right in our living room. And you just got to observe. So how can we create a more naturalistic environment and kind of get away from the emotional part, being judged, because it's 2022. The stuff's going to show up on the internet at some time, and it's going to be subject to somebody's criticism, life experiences, and opinion.
One of the things the longer you're in the hobby, you go one of two ways. You either go to the direction that everything should be done the way I do it, or you realize there's many different ways of getting to that point, getting to that end point. There's no, breeding discus. Oh, used to be discus were so hard to breed. They needed these water conditions. Sure, wild discus are very difficult to breed. They're doing great in Europe because what they're doing in Europe is they're making their water exactly like the native waters in Brazil and Peru and Colombia. With domesticated discus, the best thing I would say is, match the water conditions that they were born in. If they were raised in hard water, match that water condition. I make fun of beef heart, but what beef heart does for fish, and then why it's used in discus is, one, it's cheap to use. Beef heart used to be really cheap. Now it's getting more expensive, but you're adding all that protein, and that protein goes directly into growth in that fish. Wild discus take about 4 years to sexually mature. Domesticated discus that are fed on beef heart can sexually mature within a year. because they're having all this extra protein that's adding to their growth of the body. Is that right or wrong? Well, if you're a discus breeder and that's your job, you want to start your fish breeding as soon as you can. If you're in it just for the hobby, maybe you don't feed beef heart. Maybe you take it a little bit longer to have your fish sexually mature, or maybe never breed for you. But neither one of those ways of treating your fish is more right or more wrong. It just depends on what you want out of your hobby. If you want a more natural system, you do it one way. You know, you want when glowfish first came out, people were appalled at glowfish. But glowfish have a place in the hobby because in some cases they bring in kids into the hobby. And that's where I see our biggest failing in the hobby is not attracting the younger kids.
Thank you.
We get hobby groups all the time. I've spoken all over the world to aquarium groups, especially here in America. You look out at the crowd. Who's in the crowd? Tend to be old white men.
Yeah, you said it, not me.
Yeah, you don't see young kids.
You don't see no kid.
You really don't see people of color, especially here on the West Coast. Maybe
a handful of women.
Yeah,
to add to that.
Handful of women, and so our hobby is going to die unless we replace it with younger kids, people who are willing to learn, people that are willing to try new things. You know, they're younger kids are more likely to want to involve technologies in their aquarium.
Right.
And the aquarium trade is getting towards that, where you could, monitor all your water conditions on your phone. You could, put in different daylight cycles based upon the geography of the earth. My wife has in her little marine tank, we set the light to, a particular island in the Caribbean or, in Indonesia, and that daylight cycle goes exactly towards that area. And things like this get the younger generation more excited than me when I have my light switch that I turn off and on every day or something of that sort.
Right.
And so, whether you're right or wrong, you have to be open to new ideas. You have to be open to the fact that I don't know everything. There's no way. I tell aquarium groups, aquarium people, hobbyists probably know more scientific names than I do, because I know scientific names of the fishes that I work with.
Right.
And I'm sure in the Amazon, I know a lot of the fish because we collect a lot of fish. But, unless it's a fish that a scientist does research on, they may not know as much as hobbyists. And I'm the first to admit that hobbyists know a lot more about keeping fish in aquariums than most scientists do, because most scientists don't keep fish in aquariums. It's their study animal that they go out to the lab, or if they do, a lot of people keep zebra danios that are scientists, because they use zebra danios for embryological development. But they don't know how to keep fish. They know how to keep zebra danios. There's a problem with zebra danios. They have no idea. We have, I have a colleague that calls me every time she has problems with her zebra danios, because all she sees them as a study animal. She doesn't see it as a pet, so to speak,
right,
like we would in our aquarium.
See, you brought up a great point, talking about hobbyists and the representation. And I'm all about the solution. There's no sense in sitting up here fussing about it. It's not that there's not other demographics in the hobby. It's the fact that we're not going to no clubs. We're not going to no meetings. We're not joining no organizations. We're not doing none of that. People get tired of being ridiculed, being judged. Like, I'll give you an example. So if I say Pterophyllum scalare, then somebody corrects me because I got a Texas twang and I'm a African American and my vernacular is off. But I said Pterophyllum scalare. It's an angelfish.
Yep.
But you can't get past your preconceived notions, your prejudices, all your BS. People don't want to deal with that. I got in this hobby to get away from that because life is life enough on a daily basis. So that's really one of the beautiful reasons me and George got the show going. That's why my YouTube channel, I'm in the hobby because of that reason. We out here, we doing it. We in the hobby. It's women in the hobby. There's plenty of folks out here through all different demographics in the hobby, but the representation. So now when I talk about responsibility and I get all preachy, what I'm saying is this. I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing right now. This is a lifetime type of thing. It's not a big deal to y'all, but to me it is. Because I remember being a little black kid in Southeast Texas, writing the editors of TFH magazine, hoping that they read my letter. You know, I remember in the early days of dial-up internet being that guy writing to somebody only to be ignored. I remember now being a 42-year-old grown-ass man, a veteran, a husband, etc., getting ignored, getting looked over, getting judged. So it doesn't go away. What do? You become the solution. So it sucks to admit, but being a minority, I understand my ecosystem. I understand America. I understand that I have to be better at everything. I have to do extra everything. I have to overcompensate at everything. I'm used to it. So that's why I got my channel. I say my scientific names in my vernacular. I do what I do. And I'm trying to be the solution instead of complaining about it.
Yep. You know, there are
Excuse me, James, I'm going to grab my charger.
There are a few YouTube channels out there who encourage kids, who are teachers that bring their school kids into the hobby. And we should all want to support those channels because they are, you know, they're bringing up the next generation of fish hobbyists. And they should be applauded for doing what they are doing, you know, and you know, they should be held up on a pedestal. I truly think, because this hobby will die, you know, and for me, it wouldn't, you know, if the hobby dies after I'm dead, you know, what does that, doesn't do anything for me, you know, or anything to me. But yet, you know, this hobby brings a lot of education. You learn so much in this hobby, you know, besides science, you know, and so I see this hobby as something that can help out kids, gives them a sense of responsibility where they may not have any responsibility in their lives. You know, how often have we sat in front of our aquariums and just watched our fish for a couple hours, you know, and just feel very relaxed, you know, and for some kids, they, you know, they don't have that in their lives. And so this hobby can bring a lot to the generations coming below us.
On that note, I'm kind of glad we touched on that. One of the things that I also want you to kind of touch on a little bit, you're a research center. Mm-hmm. One of the opportunities that people can have, and this is just not just, I mean, right now it would be applicable for younger kids, and I mean younger, you know, maybe seniors in high school going to college. Mm-hmm. But the internship program that you guys run at your facility, can you talk a little bit more about that and what is the kind of people you're looking for to take advantage of that internship?
Yeah, so we have internships and volunteer programs there. There's really no difference between the two. Students tend to like internships because it looks good on a resume. Us old folks, it's okay to be volunteers. We're not, you know, we don't need anything to get an internship, but they both do the same thing. And so we invite, or people apply for an internship volunteer program at the Research Center from our website. And the only thing we ask people to do is to give us a minimum of 3 weeks. That's it.
Okay. 3 weeks.
We don't want to, you know, go through the process that takes 4 or 5 days, depending on what they're going to be doing. And then all of a sudden, them just leaving.
Okay.
So we 3 week minimum, and you can go 6 months if you want. You can go,
Okay.
and
Okay.
the only thing we ask of you besides that is you pay your way to Peru.
Okay.
And then we house you in the dormitory facilities we have on site. We will feed you, and you'll either work in the public aquarium, or or all of these things. Work in the public aquarium, help us do research, help us with research projects, work in the quarantine system, taking care of the fish and maintaining all the stocks. And so it's open to anybody. So if you go to Get Involved, on the Get Involved tab at the very top, you'll see the internships and volunteers. And then they fill out that form. That form comes directly to me. And so one of the stipulations is that if you have to be 18 and over. If you're under 18, then you have to have an adult with you.
Okay.
So that would work great with high school kids, where they come as a high school group with a teacher or a chaperone.
Okay.
We just kids below 17 gets into what happens if they get hurt, and all the things that unless you sign over power of attorney to us saying we can make all medical all the decisions on the medical front, then it's difficult to do that. But besides that, from 18 to 88, just as long as you can work, sustain yourself during the day. Usually from 8 o'clock to 6 o'clock is the normal work day for us at the research center. If you work in the aquarium, you either help maintain the fish or be a tour guide in the aquarium. And so there's a lot of opportunities for people if they want to work behind the scenes with the filtration system, with maintaining the husbandry, or in front of the tanks by being, some of the tour guides and things. Spanish is preferred, but Spanish is not a necessity there. Where you want to work depends on your Spanish ability.
Okay, so that's a good. I have something intelling to that, the Spanish. So, can you describe what you do at the Amazon Research Center, the interaction with the community, the impact that it has on the community? Because you had started we started this interview, and you touched on poverty, and that right there is an experience. I think that in and of itself is something that everybody needs to see at least once, if they have a chance to kind of understand that, hey, this is these people's livelihood. They really, literally, it puts food on their tables. So just some of the daily interactions with people in the community impact.
Well, for one, we employ people from the community. That's a big thing for them, because what's happening is many people are moving from the villages into Iquitos and into the surrounding little communities, thinking there's better opportunities for them. And and there really isn't better opportunities, because the whole world's going through a financial crisis, whether we want to admit it or not. Employment's down everywhere, and especially true there. So by hiring people within that community, we're helping raise up that community. We buy goods from the community. When we need fish for the aquarium, one of the things we do is we have the local fishermen go out and collect specific fish for us if we can't go get them ourselves. So we're trying to be good stewards for them, trying to be good neighbors, not trying to go in and say, we're this American group, and what you say doesn't matter. It matters to us an awful lot on how they look at us, how they feel about us, because we do want to be good neighbors. We want to be part of the community.
I'm glad you said that. That's important.
Difficult because they do look at us as these
gringos
coming in, Yeah, gringos. But once they get to know us, we have really good interactions with the locals in that little community. Because I've been going there for 10, 12 years now, a lot of people in the community know me because I've been going there.
Right.
When I land in the airport, there's people, hola Antonio, they remember me from year to year because, we are not the stereotypical bad American tourist. I don't go to a country expecting there to be a McDonald's, expecting there to be, Starbucks on every corner. To me, that when countries do that, they're losing their country. They're losing the culture in their country. And I really embrace the culture, embrace the people there, because you have to, and things run differently in every country.
Right. They do.
There's two sets of times in Iquitos. There is American time,
Gee.
which is
I already know.
Or there's Iquitos time, which is mañana.
You ain't getting nothing done, boy. You ain't getting nothing done punctual.
No,
and you better not be entitled either.
That's one thing that was the most difficult thing for me to get used to is the sense of urgency that Americans tend to have that many other people don't have that same sense of urgency, and it runs perfectly fine for them. And once you realize that, then you kind of get used to it. But it's still, it's still difficult for me at times.
See, you're touching on some good points. I'm glad you said that. You don't go over there and be the typical, hey, we're Americans, let me help you poor brown people. A lot of my buddies I talk to, because I'm exposed to this, I travel a lot. And George, he called me a missionary. Because sometimes we'll just be talking and I'll be like telling him my aspirations, my goals, what I'm working on. And he's like, nah, I'm working hard. I love my family, so on and so forth. This is what I want to do. He's like, I really don't want to be a missionary like you. And I'm like, I don't see it that way, because everything you're doing, I'm putting myself in place to be literally doing the same thing. I want to be the guy that gets off the plane on the dirt tarmac in the jungle, and all the people come up to me so I can give them hugs and cry and give the babies pesos and candy. Like, I want to be that guy, and I'm working on it. And
no candy.
Yeah, no caramelo. No. Yeah. But it's that thing to where a lot, and I've been exposed to it, so I know there's a whole industry on charity porn, poverty porn, where it's poverty tourism. Oh, look at us, altruistic hipsters from LA. We're gonna go to Senegal or some damn where and do an internship, and really all it is we got a quaint Airbnb somewhere from some slumlord. Ain't none of that money going back to them people. We get to go take some kids with some little dirty face jungle kids, and we get to get back on the plane feeling validated and glorified. The fact that you bring that up, it resonates with me, because these are my people and I'm passionate about it. And yes, it's just a fish. Yes, it's just a hobby. Yes, it's just a fish tank, but these are human beings behind this. This is at the end of the day, as much as I hate to say it, because I got in the fish business, like on the business side of it, when I was a teenager, and started aquascaping professionally, working at pet stores and stuff, being a field tech. And you in the business, you ain't no fish farmer until you kill 1 million fish. And literally what we are is we're earth rapers. That's what we do. We in the business of selling bodies, plainly put. So what you're doing is not that changes everything. And it's amazing how this was born from my life, my passion, being in the hobby, being that guy that I tell you I am, and going to school, being educated, being a veteran, and saying, what can I do? And then what you doing? And I want to follow in those footsteps and do if not the same thing, something damn close, you know, and it's the youth, it's the future.
Mhm.
So the fact that you understand that ethical part, that these are people, we not coming in here, waving the flag saying, hey, we American, y'all do it like we say. They've been there longer than us.
Yep.
Actually, they've been there the whole time. So it's just that humility that you bring to it. And I respect that.
You
So,
know,
you know,
one
please.
thing about our employees, and my wife would say the same thing. They're our family. They really are our resident director. He's like my little brother.
Okay.
His kids, we're their aunt and uncle. In fact, his youngest daughter is named Kiana, but her middle name is Renata, which is after my wife Renee.
Mm.
So we are part of the family there. They that's just we've adopted them. They've adopted us. It's just it's we're just family. That's all there is to it, really.
This has been a perfect opportunity to crystallize what I've been trying to do. When me and George started Fish Plan C Mas, one of the first 2-3 episodes, we had a conversation, Doc. And the conversation was state your purpose. And despite my tangents, my rants, my lack of the ability sometimes to articulate properly and just get to the damn point, what I'm trying to crystallize in words is this. As creators on this platform, we have not only an opportunity, but we have a responsibility to do something bigger than us. So when you get these people with millions of subs doing things that serve no purpose, when they have an opportunity to use this as a vehicle to do good, but nobody knows about your research facility, nobody is touting this unless there's some clout to be gained from it, or a project to give it, or a cause to jump on. Why not just do it? And how do we do that more? And maybe I'm not the face for it, I'm rough around the edges, I'm brash, I'm absurd sometimes, I get it, but I'm passionate, I'm loyal, I got a good heart, I understand my purpose. And I think the frustration from me comes from the difficulty of navigating the landscape of life, the people, understanding that everybody is in a different place of development at any given moment in their life, regardless of who they are when we encounter them. And saying that, hey, we YouTubers, we out here, we got Aqua Shell. Look at all the money rolling because of the hobby. And what are these people doing? The fish fam, the arguing, the this, the angelfish don't eat plants. Shut up. Like, what is wrong? So yes, I do get a little over the top sometimes, but this has really been a great opportunity. And I just want to personally thank you on camera, face to face, if you will. This is what I am here for. This is Warrior Planet Tanks. This is why I started this stuff. This is what compels me, a grown man, to talk to an imaginary audience in a camera. My neighbors think I'm crazy. My family thinks I'm insane. Oh, you doing your little fish tanks? You got your little business? Yes. And you still got your stupid ass same job. I beat the system, y'all. I'm in my 40s. I'm retired. I'm blessed. I still got pieces to put together in my life, but I'm getting there. And that's where I'm going with this. Like, state your purpose. And fish tanks. And Master Eduardo was in here. He was on there. Fish tanks represent that for me. State your purpose. So YouTube came up. YouTube is new. The hobby's not. What I'm trying to tell y'all, babies, is this. There's no steadfast rules in the aquarium hobby. There's only the laws and principles of nature and science. If you state your purpose, it'll help you understand, and it'll help you go and get those principles and tools so you can get your result. And that's what I've been trying to articulate the whole time. So thank you Shit, I'm getting emotional. Thank you. I got to hit the pen. Thank you for giving me the ability to do that. Just state your purpose. If you got an aquascape, it's cool, man, but it's not sustainable, baby. It's not sustainable. That's not how nature goes. If you want to run ornamental fish, that's cool, but it's not nature. That's how it goes. If you got algae in the tank, that's fine. Algae exists on Earth. Understand why. Understand what's out of balance. Do you need to tweak something? Maybe you're tweaking too much, but it's okay. And thank you for being able, like, giving me the ability to do that. Like, that's where we at. So y'all keep rocking with us. We're gonna stay growing. I appreciate that. I really, really do.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And, just to in closing, I guess, is definitely thank you.
Yeah,
for taking the time
my bad.
out of your Saturday. Because I know not all of us get to get a weekend off, so to be able to spend it with us, I really do appreciate that.
Well, I love talking fish. What can I say? I don't like talking about myself per se. I never have. It's hard for me, even my wife, when she wants, oh, you did something good today. It's like, I do what I do, and sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. But, I just enjoy talking fish.
Mm-hmm.
That's anytime I get to talk about fish, it's a good day.
I like talking about fish.
Sure.
We talk about fish. That's what we do.
That's
and
every day.
That's what's so unique about this community is that it gives us that outlet to be able to talk with other people that have the same interests that we do. Because I know that I hear this mentioned everywhere that we're always kind of the awkward or the ones out at a reunion, and we try to start talking about our tanks and our fish and what we're keeping and what they're doing, and then they kind of start looking at us like, "What's wrong with you?" So this gives us an opportunity. It gives us an outlet to be able to share our passion with people that have the same passion as we do. And so what I really want to tell you too is you're definitely a friend of the channel.
Please,
More than
absolutely.
welcome to come back anytime. Hopefully, you enjoyed our conversation with you, and we look forward to having more of these conversations. And
anytime. I mean, I'm anytime. You have a friend in me in your channel for sure.
well,
But I do have a complaint.
Sure.
Why isn't it pescados y plantas y más?
Because it was intentionally done that way because
it came up on the drawing board. It really did.
Yeah, but the reality is, because we're still a relatively small channel, our audience predominantly was going to be English-speaking people. But we wanted to add the imas at the end because we wanted to make sure that people understood that we could do this en español sin ningún problema. Es más, el episodio número 10 de nuestro canal fue totalmente en español. Y sí tenemos que hacer más contenido en español, y no necesariamente para la gente que vive en los países que habla español, pero aquí mismo en Estados Unidos tenemos muchas personas que, como yo lo he dicho muchas veces, pueden comunicarse en inglés para el requerimiento del trabajo y las cosas del diario.
Mm-hmm.
Pero ya cuando quieres hablar de cosas más técnicas y cosas que tengan que ser relacionadas con lo que nos gusta hacer, a veces es más fácil si lo hacemos en español y podemos comunicarnos mejor. Así que por eso es el IMAS. The IMAS was to try to make sure that people have the idea that, yes, we can do this in another language too. So, but if we did it all peces, plantas, y más, then it would kind of discourage some of the other.
Yeah, some people would say, "Oh no, that's a Spanish-speaking channel. I'm not going to go listen to it." Yeah.
Sí, pero podemos hacer un episodio en español.
Con usted mismo, si usted acepta
exactamente, con los mismos temas, todo.
Porque este es un tema muy interesante y sobre todo lo que están haciendo en Perú, poderlo exponer, no nomás a las personas que son de habla inglés, sino que también hacerlo con las personas que hablan español. Así que gracias, thank you very much. This is a great episode, and just share it out there. Make sure this gets out. I know Dr. Anthony is always looking for people to go down and help, and it takes a lot of hands to be able to run a facility like what they have down there. So, well, thank you for
I'm going.
For that.
I ain't figured out how yet, but it's in the universe now to be over at Lake Michigan by Thursday. I'm going. That's
Well,
that's
and
a
that-
stamp. That's a
Thank you
stamp.
guys all for being here with
Thank
us.
you.
And,
Right.
till the next one. Thank you guys.
Till the next one.
Thank
Thank you. All right, guys. Have a great one.
See.